Hi guys, welcome to this session of my interior or sketching interiors workshop. So we've done about 3 sessions so far on the YouTube channel. The first one we were kind of lightly sketching in the sort of basic shapes in this very complex scene. So this is working from my studio at home. Second session we spent sort of shading in general tones, so kind of like blocking in a sort of general tone over the whole scene. And last week we sort of went in and started to kind of develop those tones a bit, so we're working mainly in this sort of area here, just getting our tones even, getting them a bit darker, starting to get a little bit of detail. This week I'm going to be working on this little section up here. So this is quite a complex section. We're going to be looking at trying to give the impression of light. So I've got a sort of lamp in the scene here which is illuminating a bunch of things on this wall. It's not really fleshed out. If you want to look at the original reference, that's in the description below. So what I want to go in and do is start kind of developing a sense of that kind of luminous light hitting that wall, because that's going to establish a sort of approach we're going to take for the rest of the scene. There's some other stuff down in the right corner that got sort of light glowing through and so on, and a lot of this drawing is about kind of sense of light and glow and that sort of thing. So we're looking for getting a nice sense of glow today basically, and so I'm going to focus in on this section. Before the next section, what I'm going to do is complete the drawing in sort of my own time, and then make a time lapse just of this bit being drawn in up to the level that we're going to reach on this left hand side, just to kind of speed up the workshop or speed up the lessons a bit, because you don't necessarily need to watch me do absolutely everything. So I'll time lapse that and pop it at the beginning of the next video. And then the next session we're going to be focusing on trying to really push detail, so finding little smaller bits and pieces of detail within the scene and keep it going. So yeah, let's get started. As I say, I'm just going to be focusing in on this wall, so we're going to begin with the sort of general tones of the wall. I also want to just make a little note of where this lamp is, so the sort of base of the lamp. I'm going to simplify it a little bit from how it looks in reality. Yeah, I just want to kind of sketch that in. That's an important little detail, just being aware of where that is. So it sort of sits there. Yeah, something like that. So that's where, that point there is where we've got the light coming out of it. I'm going to zoom in for most of this session. I'll just adjust my camera a bit, so because I'm just going to be working on a small area. We may as well be as zoomed in as possible for it. Just make it a little bit brighter as well, my light. So yeah, you should have a good view now. So first of all, I'm going to work on this little section of the desk just behind the light, so that it's not receiving direct light from the lamp, like the rest of the wall is sort of being affected by the lamp quite a lot. This section here, sort of from this point down, because the light is sort of spilling out in a kind of cone out of the center of the lamp. That's how lamps will tend to illuminate things. The tabletop's a bit lighter than the wall, so the wall goes darker, so we're just going in and gradually darkening this wall, using the same approach as the previous session. So if you've not watched that session, I recommend having a look before watching this one, because I go through the general principles of how we're shading and how we're getting nice even tones, even gradients. So I'm just closely observing all the different directions that we've got gradients going, gradients of tone. So it's getting a little bit kind of darker as the tone dips behind the desk, and then quite quickly lightens off. So that's a sort of transition going upwards. Work a little bit on this lamp as well. So you can see that's just starting to make the glow sort of work a bit better. We also want it to go a bit sharper at the point where the light is first emerging out of the lamp. So it's sharper there, and then it fuzzes out, softens out as it moves away from that point. And moving up the wall. Around here we've still got a lot of light coming off the lamp, so it's not super dark, but up in the top left corner it's quite dark, and then as that goes down, as that tone shifts down, it gets gradually lighter because it's moving towards that light. I'm trying to work sort of gradually, like layer up my tones slowly, because it means I don't have to use it. You'll notice I'm not really using an eraser a lot. But if you want to get something to look detailed, you sort of either have to use a combination of an eraser and a pencil, or you have to work this way and sort of work in lighter passes and gradually build tone up. I talked a bit last session about the importance of not pressing too hard in general, just because if you press really hard with graphite, you'll smooth the paper out, break the, sort of destroy the tooth, and then you'll end up with a shiny drawing, which you don't want. Well, usually you wouldn't want. Obviously there's all sorts of exceptions with art. So yeah, that's not too bad, I think, for this portion of the wall. I don't want to go too much darker, because what we have next is I've got some casts hanging on my wall, some old kind of classical plaster casts, and they're going to be casting a shadow which is darker than the rest of the wall generally, so we have to make sure we've got scope to get those tones in as well. So I'm just going to be a little bit more precise with the outside shape of this plaster cast. It's a cast of Beethoven's Death Mask, for those of you wondering what it is. I'm not going to go super detailed with the the actual face itself, I just want to get it blocked in roughly, approximately. Mainly it's outside shape because I know that it's going to cast a very strong shadow up into the wall above, because it's just totally blocking out that light, that lamp on the table. So I know this is really dark, and there are a few other little elements sticking off the wall which are going to cast a shadow onto it. So I'm thinking about the light source. The light is coming from that lamp. I'm trying to look for what objects block it, what planes are kind of affected by it, and then how that causes things to become lighter or darker. So depending on the relationship between an object, the wall, and the light, you're going to get a bunch of different effects. So yeah, something like that's pretty good, I think, for that shadow. It also could go a little bit softer. It's not got as much of a soft penumbra because it's quite sharply lit, as sort of down here. And then there is another little object in the drawing which is casting. It's like a little holder that I use actually for filming these videos, but it's a slightly odd shape, so I'm going to leave that out. Totally fine to omit stuff. Obviously there's going to be so much info, there will be other things that we're not quite putting in. So I'm going to leave that out, but I am going to put this this other cast, which is a hand cast, and again just sort of block it in fairly generally to begin with. And then next to that hand, so getting a bit more complex again, we've got a couple of sheets of paper sort of taped up on my wall. So they're lighter than the wall color. So even though all the wall is in shadow, some objects on the wall are going to be lighter than the wall itself, or those sorts of things obviously are going to be happening. So I want to bear that in mind as I'm blocking it in, so I'm keeping a note of those. And you can see the light starting to work better. Just gonna lighten a bit more up into the general wall. I'm actually going to be shading back into this because that's a bit too bright up there. But you can see it, now that we're starting to get a bit more sort of interaction between the light objects and the wall, it's starting to make a bit more sense what's going on. And it's making that light feel a lot more luminous, which is what we're after. So I can just go in and just lighten some of this off. And then now that I've got that wall differentiated from the little bits of paper I've got stuck up on there, and we're not putting any detail in, so I'm just treating them as big flat planes, just like I'm treating this hand cast as a separate object. Well, just like one solid object. And then all of this wall in shadow, so this part of the wall is all being blocked out by this object, this hand casting a shadow all across it. But the paper is going to be kind of noticeably, distinctly lighter, and we'll be putting detail into actually what's on the paper, so they're kind of some old bits of diagrams out of a classical anatomy book I have that was it's a book that had fallen apart, so I didn't rip it up. But yeah, that's what will be on it. We won't actually see that. It'll be a bit too. That would be a little bit too much detail beyond what we're going to be putting in. We are going to get pretty detailed in the next few sessions once we start doing more detail. And there's a little bit of a even darker little sort of occlusion shadow, because the paper doesn't entirely sit flat to the wall. It creates a little extra kind of cast shadow. And then also this portion of the paper, even though it's sort of mostly in light, is also going to block. It's going to block that light out a bit, so it causes this sort of doubling effect. And then finally, this wall is going to need to go, the wall in light is going to need to go a little bit darker as well, so that differentiates from the paper, because obviously, and the cast actually as well, so these parts of the wall that aren't quite down near, you know, the really bright glowing section, they need to go a little bit darker, and then that separates out the, you know, because they're moving further away from the light source. Even though they're receiving direct light, they're not receiving as much of it as the bit that's really close in, if that makes sense. And down here as well, same thing's going to happen. But once we get in closer to that light source, it can go lighter again. But I want to go in and darken this shadow as well. And also just where it meets that table edge. Again, there's a little bit of a kind of occlusion shadow, indented shadow down in the wall there. So I'm just about done with kind of getting it in, initially blocked in, and then I'm going to take a bit of stock of what I've done, kind of go over my thought process in terms of what's working, what isn't with this corner. We'll do a little bit of a zoom out in a moment as well, and then I'll zoom back in and carry on working, but we'll sort of see the effect it's had on the overall piece, because it's a little bit different when you're zoomed in. Yeah, I think I'm going to need to go generally a bit darker across here. So you can see I'm working across both the shadow and the light. Here I'm happy for the shadow to go darker with the light. Sometimes you want to work on them isolated. Yeah, generally I think that looks like it's needs to go a bit darker at the back there, and probably up the top here as well. And maybe a bit generally darker with this piece of paper in shadow as well. I have to swap out for a new lead, I think, unless it's snapped. And I'm just going to get a bit more pencil lead. If I can never get it to go in, there we go. yeah, so I just wanted to go in and make this paper a bit darker. So the paper was probably too close in value to some of these other light tones, so it was sort of disrupting that glow, because it means that rather than being unified with the shadow tones, the paper was getting unified with the light tones. Same goes for these cast in shadow actually, so they're all going to need to go a bit darker, these shadows. That's good, that's pushed it back in a little bit more. Grouping them with the shadows. It's always good to think of the shadows as a single group and the lights as another group, and sometimes you need to kind of unify the shadows or unify the lights together. And the last thing I'll do is just make this cast in shadow a bit darker as well. So I want to again unify that with the shadows, unify these ones down together. Raise back into that bit. Actually, there's a little skull I've got sitting on my table there, which I'm going to be rendering in a later session. So let's zoom out a bit now and just sort of have a look at how that's starting to work. So I'm fairly happy with how that's looking. I'll just go into focus, drop the exposure back a bit. Yeah, so that's looking pretty good. I think what I feel like it needs more contrast between the lights and the dark. So what I'm going to work on now is just general passes, just darkening. Same thing I was doing just before I zoomed out actually, just kind of evening out but also darkening and unifying these shadows together. So I'm trying to make sure everything that's in the shadows feels like it's properly in the shadows. There's no confusion over whether it's in the lights or if it's in the shadows. Sometimes you do get that in drawings, but in this instance it's beneficial to make sure all of the darker tones are sufficiently dark that something like this tone here doesn't look like it might be a shadow. You want to make sure it's pretty definite that these things are in shadow. You can also make the edge of the shadow a bit crisper near where it's being cast, so say near this hand, and then the penumbra softens out as it moves back, and same up here. Let's make that really sharp there, really sharp in here, but then sort of blurring out a bit as it moves further away and up. And here as well, actually I'll make that a bit softer too. And I think what we'll find is as the drawing progresses, I'll be doing those sorts of kind of general passes where I darken or unify whole sections together. I'll be doing that a bit more because, say, down in this foreground, the more I make that dark, the brighter this appears. But we've got a few extra lights that are going to be competing for attention as we go. So I won't do those generalized passes again till maybe next week as we're starting to kind of think about detail. But yeah, with graphite it's just kind of this building up, you know, lots and lots of passes from different directions using a sharp point, whether it's a mechanical pencil or you're sharpening your piece a lot. and just really smoothing, unifying, at times softening the shadows, and then that's what's going to give us scope to create this sort of glow that we're starting to achieve up on this wall here. Yeah, I'm quite happy with how that's starting to work now. It's going to take more tweaking, obviously. These sorts of things always do. But I think that's a reasonable level to aim for. So that's what you guys working along on your own, from your own studio, your own home, can aim for before the next session, before working on the next session. But yeah, that's it for today. As always, you can subscribe to us on YouTube to watch my videos, to watch other videos and interviews and discussions from the rest of the OCAD faculty. Or you can click the link through also and see what's available to sign up for in terms of courses from OCAD. There's loads of great tutors and lots of really great content, so yeah, have a look at that. And otherwise, I'll see you in the next session.